Guys, another round of layoffs is happening yet again in late March, beginning of April 2026. Let's break this down real quick. Let's start off with the company Oracle. Oracle, a computer cloud-based, tech-based company out of Silicon Valley, California. I believe they started in 1977. They laid off 30,000 of its employees as of March 31st, possibly in counting. But that's the information I saw so far. So what does that mean? And why did they do that, so to speak? So in May of 2025, the company had 162,000 people employed, right? However, going into 2026, them doing acquisitions and, everybody wants to increase year over year. Everything's about profit and growth, right? But acquisitions cost money, trying to become a bigger company, right? Be at the edge of technology and such, it costs to do that. It costs operations and it costs and payroll, right? So because they're who they are, right? And we're in the age of AI generation and AI taking over, people's places, positions, roles, right? Operational costs slims down tremendously. Liability slims down tremendously. You don't have to worry about benefits and, turnover rate, worry about somebody quitting their job, right? Projects are easily done or done faster, done within budget or under budget, when you're not having the human factor involved, all those things, right? Amongst, trying to diversify different, in different avenues or different departments, right? So anyway, yeah, they cut 30,000 people because they didn't see fit that 18%, almost a fifth of their company, their human company was needed anymore. Their debt, raised because of these acquisitions and trying to further, push up the totem pole of being, such a provider. It's their debt is at 50 billion, if I'm not mistaken. They had about 117 billion towards acquisitions in the last couple of years. Although they made 57 billion in revenue in just 2025, they saw to it to cut 18% of their company. So you're talking about cutting people, and this is not just the U.S., right? They're based out of, they have, employees, I think it was 12,000. So you're talking about like a third of those cuts were out from India. Obviously, there's a vast majority in the U.S., Mexico, and maybe Canada, where a lot of their employees were based out of. So yeah, that's big. That's crazy. You're hurting not just think about this, guys. When a company lays somebody off, that's not one person, right? Whether they're the breadwinner or, they're part of the household income, but you're cutting off not just 30,000 people's way of living, although they're going to give you a severance package of maybe 3 to 6 months, which is decent. It's better than nothing, but the livelihood of people will be affected this year. And it may go into next year and the year after, who knows, right? Because now that person who's been betting their livelihood or their life, their career in Oracle, now has to pivot. And that's always hard to do. Anyway, 30,000 people aren't just affected. If these people have a family, right, you do 30,000 times 4, times 5, you're talking about upwards of 100,000 of people around the world being affected by an email saying we no longer need your services. Pack up your shit and go. So that's crazy. So that's Oracle, right? And that's just been happening. It's gonna continue to happen. The economy is shaky. It's just with inflation and with people wanting to keep their margins high and aggressive, that comes with cost, man. Doesn't matter what's going on in the world. People still want 18, 19, 20% margin. So they're gonna look for ways to balance that those financials, and it's always laying off people. You know what I'm saying? So that's part of it. The other part I wanted to look at or talk about real quick was how many layoffs happened in 2026 so far. So it's been reported that it's about 3.38 million layoffs. Million layoffs, guys, happened so far in 2026. That does not include March. March just ended. So that's between January and February. From January 2025 to January 2026, the layoffs increased by 117, 118%. It is getting worse, right? You have just over 3 million people being laid off, guys. And this is in the US. So like I said, Oracle, a part of their layoffs were not, maybe half of their layoffs were not in the US, right? But there's over 3 million people that were laid off within the first 2 months of 2026. And like I mentioned with Oracle's layoffs, right? You're not just affecting 30,000 people. It's the same way. So 3.38 million people got laid off. They may receive severance, may not, but you're affecting 10 plus million people in the US because these people got families. Affecting, so that one person just is not unemployed or not making money, right? The whole household is screwed, guys. Like, I don't think, these people who are doing these cuts really think about it. If they do, it is what it is. But, those numbers are more detrimental than what it seems. It's not the people just being affected, the people who are being employed. It's their attachments. There's people who have, there's some people who have 8 to 9 kids, you know what I'm saying? So whether you're single or you have a family of 10, like those numbers matriculate, they triculate to the other people in your household. So although 3.38 million people between January and February, so right, we're gonna add Oracle and all the layoffs and all the reports that's gonna happen in March and April and stuff, right? Although it was only 3.38 million people, which is staggering because the working class amount of people isn't like it. It's around like 100, 150 million, right? So that affected rough math, 2 to 3%, maybe 1% of people who can work or work got, cut off. But these are people working, right? So families, right? Kids, spouses, you're affecting tens of millions of people / households. You're as in these companies doing these mass layoffs. That's what's crazy to me. That's what I had to think about real quick. So it's happening again, guys. Let me know in the comments if you were one of the people affected. I was laid off last year, so I understand how that feels and what that comes with. So let me know in the comments if you guys were affected either by Oracle, if you guys are working at Oracle, or you've been just one of the 3+ million who was affected by a layoff in the last couple months, guys. 2026, it's getting more hectic, more volatile, more crazy, just more harder to sustain, man. I know there's people who are betting on retirement and, or they were trying to reach a certain number before they retired. And then you get that, your hand chopped off because of something you didn't necessarily do, So it's just a reminder, you can't always give 100% to these companies. You just can't.